What if time were no barrier? What if the eras of football could merge, as if the universe conspired to place two stars in the same sky? In 2003, Randy Moss was a weekly spectacle, one of the most electrifying players to ever step onto an NFL field. He was the perfect storm: absurd speed, surreal range, and an almost mythical arrogance, backed by numbers and feats that bordered on the supernatural. Now, imagine that same year, the Minnesota Vikings had on their roster not only Moss, but also Justin Jefferson, the young prodigy who would only be drafted 17 years later. What would happen if these two stars shared the same locker room, the same huddle, the same field? The scenario is unlikely, but compelling. And like all good sports, what-if questions, it doesn't seek a definitive answer. It seeks emotion, imagination, and above all, respect for what could have been. To understand the impact of this simulation, we need to go back in time. We need to step back into 2003. The 2003 season began with the Vikings hungry for redemption. Mike Tice was the head coach, trying to build a solid team around his quarterback, Daunte Culpepper. Randy Moss, meanwhile, was entering his 6th season. He was already a veteran in terms of impact, but he still played with the fury of a rookie looking to prove something. In 2003, Moss had one of his best seasons, 1,632 yards and 17 touchdowns. He was nearly impossible to guard. Defenses knew what was coming, and yet they couldn't stop him. Now, add Justin Jefferson to the equation. In his rookie year in the real NFL, in 2020, Jefferson threw for 1,400 yards, breaking all-time records and showing a technical and athletic dominance that was reminiscent of Randy Moss. The two have different styles. Moss was more vertical, more explosive. Jefferson is fluid, unpredictable, a master of separation in the middle of the field. But they both share a common DNA: the ability to change the course of a game with just one play. If Jefferson had been on the Vikings roster in 2003, he would have been a rookie with an immediate impact. The presence of Moss would certainly alter his development path, but in a positive way. Imagine an offense in which Moss stretches the field vertically, drawing double attention from safeties, while Jefferson operates on intermediate routes, exploiting open spaces with his surgical precision. The offensive coordinator would have a serious problem how to distribute the ball between two generational talents. Daunte Culpepper, who was already an efficient quarterback, would see his numbers balloon. Instead of relying solely on Moss to stretch the field, he would have Jefferson as a constant escape valve. Third downs would be less dramatic. The defenses would have to choose double Moss or risk Jefferson man-to-man. It's a dilemma that no defense at the time was equipped to solve. Tactically, the Vikings' offense would gain depth and variety. Moss would remain the primary big play threat, but Jefferson would add a new level of sophistication to the offense. He would be used on crossing routes, slants, corner routes, and even motion plays that were rare for wide receivers at the time. Jefferson's versatility would foreshadow offensive trends that would only become popular more than a decade later. Imagine Week 7 of the 2003 season. The Vikings face the Denver Broncos. Randy Moss is facing Champ Bailey, one of the best cornerbacks of that generation. Bailey is glued to Moss, negating some of his influence. But then Justin Jefferson comes into play. He's in the slot. A linebacker tries to cover him. On a perfect post route, Jefferson burns the coverage and catches an 18-yard pass. On the next snap, the safeties drop down to support the middle of the field. Culpepper sees the opening and launches a missile to Moss, who burns Bailey on the sideline for a 50-yard touchdown. That would be the kind of domino effect Jefferson would cause. He wouldn't just produce, he would enhance Moss. Now think about the impact off the field. Randy Moss has always been a leader in his own right, not with rousing speeches, but with attitude, with presence. Justin Jefferson, coming out of LSU, would bring a new energy. a vibrant, almost dance-like mentality. The Vikings locker room would become a laboratory of offensive culture where the old and the new would learn from each other. Moss would see Jefferson as a continuation of his legacy. Jefferson would see Moss as a chance to learn from a master still in his prime. The sports media wouldn't know what to make of this duo. In 2003, social media was still nascent. But on TV shows, in newspapers, and on broadcasts, the Moss and Jefferson phenomenon would dominate every headline. Nicknames would quickly emerge: the Thunder Twins, the Purple Duo, the Root Kings. The NFL would have no answer, and history, perhaps, would be rewritten. The Vikings finished the 2003 season 9-7, missing the playoffs on tiebreakers. With Jefferson on the roster, that history would change. One more game won, one more comeback, one more decisive touchdown. Maybe Minnesota would finally break its mold and make a strong run to the playoffs. The NFC in 2003 was competitive, but with an offense led by Moss, Jefferson, and Culpepper, the Vikings would have the ammunition to challenge any defense. Think about the matchups against the Packers, their biggest rival. Imagine Jefferson in the slot, facing a battered secondary, while Moss dominates the opposite side. Favre would have to throw enough touchdowns to keep up with a constant firefight. Maybe the NFC North title would change hands. Maybe the Vikings, with a little more luck, would have made it to the Super Bowl. What we do know is that no defensive coordinator would have slept soundly that season. From a historical perspective, this pairing would change how we view the evolution of wide receivers. Instead of a timeline where Moss dominated in the 2000s and Jefferson began to shine in the 2020s, we would have a fusion of talent that would force the NFL to accelerate its innovations. Defensive schemes would have to evolve faster. Zone coverages would have to adapt. The nickelback role, for example, would become more relevant sooner because no one could contain Jefferson with a conventional linebacker. And for the fans? Oh, for Minnesota fans, it would be a golden age. The Metrodome would vibrate in a new way. The combination of Moss and Jefferson would mean hope, spectacle, and, who knows, redemption. Not just a what if, but a why not. Jefferson would learn how to deal with double-team defenses by watching how Moss did it years ago. Moss, on the other hand, might extend his career with the Vikings, motivated by seeing Jefferson as a kind of hungry, humble younger brother. It's possible that the chemistry between the two could create something that goes beyond numbers. It goes into the realm of legend, like Montana and Rice, like Brady and Gronk. It would be a connection that would define an era, even if that era was an impossible dream. In the end, that's the magic of what if. They don't have to be real to be powerful. By imagining Justin Jefferson playing alongside Randy Moss in 2003, we're not just honoring two of the greatest talents in the history of the position. We're also acknowledging how much football is about moments, connections, and possibilities. Because at the end of the day, what is sports if not a time machine fueled by dreams? The 2003 season would have been just the beginning. With Randy Moss and Justin Jefferson in the same offense, the Vikings would have been poised to build an offensive dynasty. In 2004, reality brought a breakout year for Culpepper, who threw for 4,717 yards and 39 touchdowns. And that was without Jefferson. Now, imagine that same team with the rookie entering his sophomore year, more mature, more comfortable with the offensive system, and with his connection with Culpepper established. Jefferson, who in reality had a monstrous jump in production between his freshman and sophomore years, would have benefited even more from having an elite teammate by his side. With defenses increasingly focused on Moss, Jefferson would have had room to explore short and medium routes, breaking tackles and gaining yards after the catch. His specialty. In a plausible simulation, Jefferson could have finished 2004 with historic numbers: somewhere between 1,500 and 1,700 yards and up to 12 touchdowns. Moss, even with a split in targets, could still maintain his average of at least 1,300 yards and 14 TDs. Culpepper would likely break records for yards and touchdowns at the time, possibly threatening Peyton Manning's numbers that year. The three-way connection between the three could have been called the Purple Triangle. Extra chapter: Imagined Games. Now let's delve into three key games from the 2003 season, reimagined with Jefferson in the lineup. Week 4, Minnesota Vikings versus San Francisco 49ers. In reality, the Vikings won 35-7. With Jefferson, they would have extended their lead. Jefferson could have added at least 120 yards on crossing routes, while Moss would have scored 2 touchdowns on long throws. The 49ers defense, already vulnerable, would be mentally destroyed before halftime. Week 13, Minnesota Vikings versus St. Louis Rams. This game, in real life, was a close 48-17 loss. The inclusion of Jefferson completely changes the landscape. The Vikings offense would have the pace to keep up an offensive firefight. Jefferson would exploit the slot against a sluggish defense, and Moss would punish the Rams' young cornerbacks. It could have been a 42-35 victory. Week 17, Minnesota Vikings versus Arizona Cardinals. The 18-17 loss cost them the playoffs. One of the most painful losses in recent Vikings history. With Jefferson, maybe the Cardinals' last offensive drive wouldn't have happened because Minnesota would have led by more than 10 points. Jefferson would have been the safety valve on third downs and helped maintain possession. The win would have